Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump celebrated their 10-year wedding anniversary last fall. Andrea Bernstein writes that the marriage was, quote, the joining of two famous real estate dynasties, each braided into worlds of politics and media and celebrity. She details how those dynasties came to be in the new book, American Oligarchs, the Kushners, the Trumps, and the Marriage of Money and Power. And Andrea joins me now. She is also co-host of the Trump Inc. podcast. Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here.
So you begin your book with a very glitzy event, the wedding of Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump at Minster, the President's Golf Club in New Jersey. How does their wedding, you think, paint this picture of what their future would eventually look like?
So what's interesting about the wedding is it was sort of covered at the time as a society event. Here are these two real estate dynasties. They're joining, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. They're beautiful. They're involved in New York civic society. So it got some attention, and then basically people forgot about it. And I went back and I looked at the wedding, and I was like, here is the moment when these two families come together, but also it symbolizes what the book is about, which is how money and power are tied together. And you can see that all play out in the wedding.
So, in fact, you detail the rise of both the Kushner and Trump dynasties in the U.S. How does their history shape how each family survives, first of all, and then ultimately thrives when it comes to both the New York and New Jersey real estate scenes?
Well, for the Trump family, Donald Trump's grandfather and his father were in many ways like Donald Trump, hustling entrepreneurs. And you can see, and I went over and documented their business practices, lots of similar things, like saying something is worth a lot of money when they want a bank loan and saying it's not worth much money when they have to pay taxes. Those practices survive until today. The Kushner family has a different trajectory. Jared Kushner's grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They had a harrowing escape from the Nazis, a real tale of courage. But then they sort of fudged their family relationships to be able to immigrate into the United States. And they came here with nothing and really did build a real estate empire from what they had arrived with, which was $2 in their pockets. So that is Jared Kushner's background.
And it's interesting because you also talk about Donald Trump's mother, and perhaps not a lot of people realize that she actually worked as a domestic at the Carnegie Mansion. Tell us a little bit about that.
She arrives in the United States as a domestic worker, and she ends up working on the Upper East Side.
She came from Scotland.
And it's an amazing story when you think about it, because her tastes were sort of shaped by that era. Tall pillars, big grand things, gold, a lot of things that we see in Trump properties came from his mother's aesthetic, which came from her having had that experience as a young woman just immigrated to New York.
Yes, so early on you write this, quote, 20 years into the 21st century, we live in an age of oligarchs, where the very richest Americans hold vast sway, not only over their elected officials and, by extension, the courts, but also the election process itself. You also later say that it's not new that rich business leaders would try to monetize their connections to the President of the United States. But how is what we are currently seeing right now so different? And I'm thinking specifically of 1100 Pennsylvania Avenue, just down the street from the White House.
I'm so glad you raised this, because this is what I really wanted to tell. It's a multi-generational saga of two families, but it's a story about American democracy and how we as a nation have made choices that have made it easier and easier for the very wealthy to control our political processes, until we're at a point where we are today, where the president, basically to get his attention, you go and you book a room or plan an event at his hotel. You pay him money directly, and then he pays attention to you. That is a very fragile state for our democracy.
So, you know, since you have studied these two families so extensively and how they operate, I wonder if there's anything specific you're going to be watching for, or any moves that you might anticipate seeing once President Trump does leave office.
Right. Well, what I'm going to be watching for right now is what happens after the impeachment trial, if, as expected, he is acquitted. Because what we see is that, and you know, what I've sort of documented is over the decades, he keeps escaping consequences for his actions. And each time he escapes them, he does something more severe. So, for example, the day after Mueller testified and everybody thought it was a dud, the day after is when he calls the Ukrainian president and says, do us a favor, though. And the question is, if there is no accountability for the actions he's committed in Ukraine, what does he do next? And what does that mean for our democracy?
That's a really fascinating book, and I think a lot of people are going to learn about the origin stories of these two families. Andrea Bernstein. Andrea, thank you so much for stopping by.
It's great to see you.